All right, let's cross over, guys. Oh. Let's see where it's quieter over here, maybe. All right. So Fulton Center, major transit, kind of reinvented, reopened with a stack of concourses. One of the things that we'll note a lot of here, I mentioned before the integration of video and kind of between branding like this with a fairly dense, I like to talk about pixel pitch here. In the windows we saw some LED panels that looked kind of widely spaced and artsy. Too widely spaced to really look like images, more color. Here, things are tight enough that you can actually see images. If we walk up and really look at this, check out the pixel pitching of LEDs. So these are modular LED panels. You can feel each LED line kind of mounted through.
Wow.
There are different ones. So you tend to see screens like this used often for events, exterior lighting, things like that, where it has to be bright enough to compete with daylight. So Coachella, big film concerts that want video screens are going to use high output stuff. This is not that high output, but the pixel pitching and spacing, we talk about where the viewing distance is once you get into specifying screens. You can feel the heat coming off of this too. Even though it's LED, it's not that LED has no heat. It's that it's pushed back, and because we're up against a wall, part of the way that this corrects for heat is venting forward between these things. This is Arup Engineering designed a lot of the lighting and daylighting solutions here, and why we come here is really to look at the integration of daylighting as we go down. One of their goals was to deliver more daylight down to the trains. We're going to go down the pretty staircase instead of the convenient escalators, but we'll go back up the escalators. And yes, you're allowed to get donuts if you need. This is usually when we get hungry. So this is a good clean view of the so Arup won some awards for the daylighting design here. This skylight at the top has a series of adjustable mirrors. Those mirrors can help redirect the light down. They also serve as illumination in the evening too, that there's LED strips integrated in to help push light down. But the goal of this scoop is really to push light down not only to this level, but down through to the lower concourses as well. So there's more daylighting available.
So like, where is the mirror, Professor?
The mirrors are
on this side of the wall?
The mirrors are at the skylight level.
Okay.
They're the things that look like window washy squeegees. Have reflective sides to them to redirect, and then LEDs on the bottom that light up at night too. They're motorized. In this case, it's a program written thing. Actually, you can see A couple of them are rotated to pick up the sunlight now and bounce it to the opposite side in the dome, right? We get one hot spot up at the top where the sun is hitting at the moment, and you can see the opposite bounce. So at this point, sun is setting enough that we don't have a ton of bright sunlight, but that's the redirecting one. So I'll double check whether it's entirely automated or whether it's, I think it's programmed based on sun modeling, but I think it does it regardless if it's a cloudy day or not. So it's likely that they used astronomical clocks to chart sun location. Other things that we see from this recent installation. Downlights so these are deep recessed downlights. Tonight when we go to Rockefeller Center, we'll see some other large-scale deep recessed downlights that hide the source fairly far up. Notice what this source is. It is not LED, it is a compact fluorescent source, right? Old school. So this is how long it took to develop and get this one approved. The other thing is, because this is an MTA space, it took a long time for LED to be approved by the MTA. Compact fluorescent was an acceptable technology. They knew how long it would last, and so you'll still find fluorescent lighting used in some of the newer stations. I shouldn't put it that way. LED was accepted by the MTA 3 years ago. So a lot of the newer stuff, AC Hickox, one of the professors, does a lot of work on MTA jobs at Domingo Gonzalez Associates. Most of their recent work is all LED. Not all of it, but she can show you where all the bodies are buried. But these, with compact fluorescent especially, keeping it nice, deep regress was very important to try to minimize and control glare, hide the source, which people don't like the look of. And this is a matte reflector, so you don't see the shininess of the source. It's meant to try to hide it. The other thing we'll see are small scale step lights. These are LED, and you see more and more of those used with the technology that, LED is cool enough to fit down there, low maintenance enough. Let's go down to the bottom and look up, and we'll experience more.
And maybe like the fluorescent doesn't come with that size. That might be the use
That's true.
Right?
I think that they were able to get away with this LED because, first off, it wasn't required to hit the light levels, I think. We'll go down. We could take the elevator. Should we see what the elevator looks like?
If we were higher, I would. It's one floor down.
Oh, that's true. Might as well just go down.
This is just a central hub for travel. That's what this is.
This is a
Downtown.
central hub for travel. Yeah, it's not in use. It's not that different than Grand Central Station.
Yeah, I think
This is subways only, but it's still.
I think more updated.
Oh yes, this opened 6 or 7 years ago. It's relatively new. Yeah, this was a big renovation to clean up and improve transit here. It used to be fewer overlaps between them.
To the Oculus from here.
Yes. We'll walk on the street because it's just so pretty, but yes, we could walk from, you have to walk along the train lines, but the MTA does connect between them, yes. Yeah, so that's down at the train terminals below. And yeah, you can get a sense of the skylight from here. So they have that inner mesh that helps reflect the light as well. Highly reflective steel. And then above this are offices. You can get a little peek of, there's Shake Shack up there. And then further up, we start to get into offices that at night would be more illuminated in other spaces. But this gives them the benefit of daylight while giving them some privacy and maximizing the push of light down.
There's less like, you can see the signs, but the hierarchy is definitely the advertisements over the wayfinding.
That's a great point. Here, the signs for advertising are much more dominant compared to the wayfinding. You're right. Like, there's actually no light on the entry signs for the MTA.
No.
Once you go into the MTA, then it's different. But this is and it's a very dark space. The finishes are dark. When we compare this with the Oculus, where we're going to go a little bit later today, as a different transit hub with a lighter finishes, this is a much darker space. It hides dirt really well, I think, but everything here feels very dim. Even though, yeah, what are we getting for light? What's that?
50.
Can you guys believe it? 50-foot candles here. So we have a lot more light here than we had in Grand Central, but it feels darker than Grand Central Station, or at least darker than MetLife Building, which had 50-foot candles. And why do you think it feels so much darker to us?
Floor.
Materials, absolutely. All the materials we see here probably have a reflectance of 7%, super low. So it all feels very dark.
Floor is kind of like dark.
Yeah. So even though we have 50-foot candles, lots of daylight, it doesn't feel that bright. Good.
Very comfortable.
It's comfortable though, yep.
Very comfortable. Yeah.
And
I
it's
don't
nice
feel
to
like
have the
I'm
daylight.
anywhere glare.
Nice.
Yes. Yep. I think the other thing that we see here is sort of an honesty of materials. Like there's not a lot of stonework or gypsum or anything like that. Here's perforated steel panels to allow for ventilation. Here's architectural forms, glass. I think a lot of that carries through when we look at the 9/11 Memorial Museum too. This idea of here are the honest materials being used.
What is the style like we consider for the building?
The architectural style for this building, I need to double check and see what they would qualify it as. I don't remember. I mean, I have to look at the term.
But like
it's
now, like-
contemporary. I think this is the same approach that we saw. Similar approach to what we see in Cooper Union Building too, where the modular ceilings, integrated lighting, but what's the architectural style? I gotta look. Contemporary. Sorry, terrible answer. I'll look up the actual style. Now I'm curious.
No, I was just curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, let me look it up.
There's like lots of light, like lots of like additional downlight over here.
Yeah.
But I guess like they had that much because like they are using fluorescent lamp, right? That's why they had like this much downlight, right? Otherwise,
I think so. Yeah, that they wouldn't need this many LED lights. Yeah, the compact fluorescents have limited output. So this is 42 watts, so it's 3,200 lumens, delivering only 1,600. So
that's why
yeah,
need this.
that's why they needed so many downlights. Is
And
the
like-
low output.
Also, like it's hard to control their beam, so like it doesn't come down.
Yes, that's part of why we have such deep cones. That the deeper cones help reflect light further down, but it's still not efficient. All right.
And I guess those cones are spreading the light out, like
Yeah.
further, like doesn't give the direction. Like the clear cones, right?
Yes.
But if they would have used clear cones, then you would see the source. The fluorescent, like
We
you
would
said.
see the fluorescent. Yeah. So the clear
Yeah.
cones would be more efficient, but you'd see the source. Okay. So Fulton Center was designed based on the ironclad buildings around it. So like international style influenced it, but they're not saying a specific style for it. So yeah, it is a contemporary structure trying to define.
So like nowadays, like architects are not following those kind of
Oh, I think some will.
styles, right? Like
some do, some
are,
yeah.
and like some doesn't following the style. Like they just
I think it depends on the neighborhood. What are you trying to achieve? What's the building's purpose, right? If you're working for a campus, and most of the university campus has been designed in the neoclassical style or the postmodern style, then you might try to echo that. You might say, what's my take on postmodern architecture? In this case, they were responding to the neighborhood. I think Cooper Union did kind of the opposite, right? They said, okay, we're going to do what we can do now as a juxtaposition.
or like they are trying to set up the values of the school. Like we just don't look at the like past. We also look for the future.
I think that could be accurate. Yeah. All right, let's go back up to the plaza, and we'll head
this way?
towards. Yeah, we can go up. We can go up this way. We'll see a lot more daylight design in the contemporary structures like this too. I think that Sometimes daylighting is in your scope, sometimes it is not. It's always exciting when it is. You don't get a chance to do it all the time.
Yeah. So like when the daylighting is in the scope, that means that like they have to include us like from the like.
Yes. Hopefully they include you from
SD.
very early. SD, yeah. Some of the engineers like Arap was involved even as early as programming, figuring out building orientation and discussing light penetration based on that. So daylighting is something that we don't always get to work on as lighting designers. When we do, it's exciting. Most frequently, you need to be involved early on during schematic design or even during programming when you think about glazing and building orientation. But one of the things we'll see as we look at more of the structures in this half of the day is there's a lot of glass, a lot of daylighting. Really, from the international style on, from the 1960s on, a lot of New York skyscrapers were metal and glass, and a lot of the buildings we see, even the Oculus, which kind of defies, is not at all international style, still is thinking a lot about our access to daylight as something important. And whenever you have opportunities as a lighting designer to improve access to daylight and to views, it's great. I think it's a very good way to add and show your value to a project. So this is the main hall for 9/11 Memorial Museum. We've just gone through the dark transition. Now there's more light here. Fisherman Stone, as the lighting designer, was looking at large scales, trying to use the texture of the walls. This swearing wall segment. Yeah. Just the scale of some of it.
Yeah, the scale.
Yeah.
I mean, even some of the shows, I'm always just like, think of a little one times 1,000.
Yes.
With engineering and materials, just the mass.
Absolutely. And the lights are completely hidden here. Like the lights hitting the wall are up beyond the ceiling structure. So you can't see them. Really, the wall. The idea of invisible visibility. It's more of a theatrical term, Tipton idea, but yeah, because we're concealing the light, the slurry wall really pops as the primary light source in the whole gallery.
There's nothing pulling your attention that has something brighter,
Yeah.
lens or anything.
Scale of the outer exhibit is very large. There's a lot of kind of large-scale artifacts and replicas, and then statements. It's a place for quieter contemplation. When we get to the inner exhibit, which you can see on the website, it's much more condensed. There's a lot of audio pre-recorded that you hear as you travel through, so it's a very different experience than out here. There's space for discussion, for kind of quiet contemplation. So the museum exhibit is underneath the fountain. These large-scale volumes are the blocks where World Trades 1 and 2 used to sit. Above them is the fountain. All right. So for a lot, yeah. Go. Oh, sure. Why not? So for a lot of us, this was our first time in the museum. Outside of the content of it, which is heavy, just talking about high load and low load, like how much information was contained in the outer portion that Fisher Stone was designing, how much was contained in the inner portion that Available Light handled. What are some of your observations, some of your takeaways from the group? What was it like for you?
I think you said.
Huh?
You said front.
Oh,
Sorry.
it's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
No,
It's good.
You talked about like the story that they told. So even just walking in the lobby of the museum and then that day. Like everybody talks about, it's like, oh, it's the perfect day, right? There wasn't a cloud in the sky, it was sunny, and then the sky was black. It kind of mimicked that. It was very light and like lighter materials, brighter, and then as you went down, the initial staircase and escalator got very dark very quickly.
It's a really good point, just in terms of the, it getting dark quickly, feeling like it's going from the perfect day down to a very dark. That transition from light to dark is really heavy, maybe heavy-handed too. And how about the transition back to light at the end? Was that, so there's kind of the inversion too, right? That when leaving the museum, we're traveling back up to the day. Did anyone feel before you went up that last escalator, were you thinking you'd come up into nighttime? Did you have any idea what time it was? I certainly didn't.
No, I didn't know about the time. Yeah.
Especially because the time change just happened a few days ago. I was thinking, oh, we're coming up into the night. It's been such a long time in the museum. What else? We started talking a little bit about the exhibit structure. So there was if we were loosely breaking it up, there was the day of, the development, which takes up a lot of the inner gallery. And then we go back to what happened before. Like here's the scale models of the World Trades, that one room that is almost like a breath before diving back into stuff that happened afterwards. The aftermath of 9/11, the rebuilding. I guess the rebuilding is the last section, right? There's the excavating what happened that day and all the reactions, and then there's the kind of aftermath worldwide towards the end, the last room or two. Were there things you found as through lines, or?
So I was thinking about the navigation. So we were supposed to go through the morning one wall and then go to the other wall.
That's a good question. There's, as you were navigating, there were some choices too. So the
Two choices.
the timeline, you don't wrap back on the wall, right? You're kind of moving forward, but there were these breakout rooms, right? That anyone remember any of the orange breakout rooms? What was inside of those?
They were audios, and they tell stories and what happened that day, and interviews of the people.
Yeah.
And as they were talking, there was what he's talking about. The lighting was kind of bright and going down, and those kind of there was happening in.
So those rooms use the light as an illustrative, and there's a lot of projection on the dark surfaces too. And those, topic-wise, are outside of New York generally. So one of those rooms was Washington D.C., or one of them was what's happening on the flights. So they're here things that are happening in the timeline but aren't in Manhattan, right? And then there's all the stuff happening in the main, along the main pathways, mostly what was happening that day, in the city, I guess, as opposed to in other places. But yeah, it's interesting to my mind how the light in those side things is very much used for illustration. It modulates with the narrative. It helps tell the story. What about navigating the main spaces? Were there any consistent architecture or lighting techniques that helped connect the exhibits for you, or helped you to navigate and know where you are?
I would say they lit they had laminated letters that they would light up, and it was quite interesting for they weren't lighting where you're walking, they were lighting the exhibits and whatever you're supposed to look at, rather than anything else. So basically you're just looking for walkways, the lighting is just based off of the rest of it. Sorry.
You're doing great. It's a long day. Yeah.
The lighting was based off of what you were supposed to see.
Yeah.
The timeline on the wall, how from time to time it was just the ceiling lights were highlighting the timeline, so at what time you need to walk through this, so start at 8 o'clock and then 9 o'clock and 10.
I think, very good points, both of you, in terms of the timeline helped ground us throughout. And then you're absolutely right that almost all of that exhibit was focal glow, right? There's very little ambient luminescent lights or play of brilliance. Everything is, I'm going to draw your eye to this object, to this artifact, to this graphic on the wall with information. And then coupling that with videos sometimes, right? So it would be a mixture of here's what the architectural lighting is doing, and then here are surfaces that have projection or that have a screen where you have content to look at too. Absolutely, that tends to drive us. And you're right that there's often in galleries there's negative space. There's the unlit spaces where we travel, right? People generally stay out of the light itself, and they're walking kind of to look at the different objects without interfering or blocking it. A lot of times in museums you're designing that light to make sure people can approach the art without casting a shadow on it. A lot of the video projections, they got a fairly high aiming angle and special keystoning so that people could stand pretty close to the image without interrupting it. We saw that in that first hallway that had the map of the world that you have to walk through, and there you could cast a shadow on it, but it's set up so that people tend to walk through it.
Speaking of through lines, they also use multiple surfaces to project onto, so it's not a giant flat wall, but it allows movement throughout it as well. So that was very cool.
That's true too. Yeah, just the layout of the gallery takes you on a tour around things. Did anyone feel lost at any point in there? I did a couple times. Yeah. Especially with the little breakout side sections, or when you can go around something, it can get disorienting too.
Like we are supposed to navigate like the timeline, or like we would be going to like the other side, because there was a two wall, right?
Right, that's
So
true.
One wall was kind of timeline, and other wall was like having.
That had a lot of artifacts and
Yeah.
other items, right?
So, like-
It's You almost have to bounce between them.
People are coming back. There was no people are not coming back.
You're right. It's all single direction, right? Here's a beginning and here's an end, and so the timeline's on one wall to kind of keep you oriented. That's to try to keep you from getting lost, and then there's all this other content on the other wall, so you kind of bounce between the two. It's
Okay, yeah.
it's tricky. It is. There's a lot to take in a footprint that's not gigantic, and I think there are other museums that are dense in this way too. Not even in terms of topic, but in terms of layering on audio and sound along with visuals like this. Generally, the museums I think of that have this level of input are often focused on children, or like science museums. Sometimes they'll have galleries that get this involved. Museums of technology certainly will. But I think it's a challenge to throw so much information at you that is heavy information, right? This isn't the Van Gogh Museum. This is the 9/11 Memorial Museum. So it's a little hard to disassociate from the content of it too, which is heavy, tragic content.
I also feel like that's purposeful. Like they want to kind of overwhelm you because it was an overwhelming event.
I think you're right. I think that there's an intention there to try to give people a sense of all the information that was coming that day and what makes. One of the things that we ran out of time to do, but so that was one of the two galleries, and then there's a side gallery too. When you come out of that gallery, there's a recording studio next to it. So, and I usually take us in to see how do you get someone who's not used to being on camera, who's not used to sharing, comfortable with being in front of the lights and talking about their story. So it's set up there where you come out of the exhibit that you did, having been bombarded with a lot of information and feeling either remembering your experience of that day or getting a sense of what that experience was like for people who don't remember 9/11 or who were younger. But the recording studio is interesting. You come in and it's much quieter, and it's they show videos that people have made, and then you open up and there's a sound booth that you're private inside. They've got a camera behind a two-way mirror so that someone is talking to you to prep you about what the experience is and how to speak to the video camera, and then the lights turn on and it warms gradually up to the dim level you need, so it's not super shocking. It's a very interesting way to get someone coming out of the museum ready to be filmed without feeling like, oh, I'm not ready to share my story now. So I think that's part of what they're structuring this for, is this sense of overwhelming, this is what the experience was for us and for you, and then trying to capture your experience afterwards. The other gallery, which we didn't get to see, is has all the portraits of people who were lost, and it's a lot about them, their biographies, their who they were, what they did. So that's almost like a memoriam for them. We didn't get to that room. The big lighting things there, that room is much simpler in terms of lighting. There's wall washing to light all the people and give you a sense of just how many people there were. And then there's, you're walking on glass floors, and under they're lighting down onto the foundation underneath. So it's pretty. It's much lower load, easier to kind of absorb people, and there's a lot of seating there for people to sit down and remember a loved one if they were one of them.
As per like lighting, like I did not feel like there was like any of the lighting that is like glaring. I did not feel a glare. Like
that's true, right? There's very little glare. It's all focused on the objects mostly, and some of them, especially when you get to the aftermath, where you start to get some of these small objects, there's a lot of lighting integrated into the displays, right? Small scale lights to, when you think about the scale of what was lit outside, like Fisherman and Stone did the outside, right? So the big fire truck and the sluice wall and the beams, they're lighting these giant monolithic objects. Then we get inside, and available light is lighting, a teddy bear or an apple or all these very small scale objects. So that idea of localizing the light, keeping low glares, and keeping the focus on the objects. Now, with that said, it was disorienting. I think it's intentional. I think they structure it well to get us through, but
there were like a couple of like wall glazers, like there was like wall washers used. Your
oh, something fell down, Shreya. Is it a pill or something? I don't know what. Was it Shreya?
tablet.
Oh yeah, got it. Thank you.
There was like behind the fire truck, there was a blue light that was on, like that was to represent like kind of a fire.
That's true.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, there was a room that was encased in like a gloss glass that had blue uplight from it that made it seem like the ambulance itself was like surrounded by smoke.
Yes, that's true. So there's some illustrative lighting there too, suggesting what was going on.
That was the only place they used color, I guess. They did not use like.
Interesting. Where else did they use color?
They used color, like little bit of color, like when there was a kind of accepting on the wall or something, like light color.
Mostly, so the side pockets, the rooms where they were talking about the airlines and all, would have an orange glow to the cove above, because that didn't interrupt the white projections mostly. But you're right, there's a lot of white light, and then there's some blue light for accenting here and there. And really the object colors are what tend to show. Yeah, so that's an example of museum lighting. That's as we go to Brookfield Place and we look at retail lighting, it's interesting to see what elements translate between the two and what is totally different. That really, this is a museum built to, especially that exhibit, is built to be so much visual information it's meant to overwhelm you. And how does lighting support the narrative, work with the sound, work with the projections to balance it, right? If the lighting was too bright, we wouldn't see the projections. If the lighting was too dim, we couldn't see the objects. So this is where localized sources, focal glow, I think were used very effectively to help drive that narrative. Yeah.
Also, like reading like the text was kind of hard. Like
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point.
Little bit tension to the eyes. Like you get tired with the eyes, like, reading those many text over there.
Anyone else have noticed that it was hard to read text? And I always wonder whether that was light levels or just because of how much information exists, or if it's
also that
OCD.
It's so crowded and you're trying to like herd yourself through it too.
That's true. Yeah.
I didn't have that much trouble reading the text. I'm not sure. Just because I feel like there's so much attention going towards it as like purposeful lighting that I thought that was kind of relatively clear. I mean, in some aspects, I think it got pretty dark and kind of shadowy in some context. But I think overall, it was the whole point of it was that the text and the projected light was the focus of wherever it may have landed.
Yeah. That's true. I think my issue with it might be more the number of things to look at any given time distracts from compared to like going to MoMA or something and looking at here's the text about a piece and then the piece itself where there's not as much, it's easier to focus on it.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. In terms of the design, certainly they lit I think there was sufficient lighting to see the text most of the time, and the fonts were good and stuff like that. I wonder if you guys saw the same thing. A lot of times when I've gone through, people have audio devices to listen in to. Yeah, phones, or you can take the tour that way, and I think that I almost wonder if they relinquished the text and just did it by phone so that I'd have a mix of audio and visual input. That might make it easier. Be interesting to try sometime.
Like closed captions.
Yes, it's exactly that. I think it's produced too, so I think it's closed caption, but sound effects and a lot of the stuff that you would hear anyway in the gallery, they've integrated into the recording. I realize that's probably the only time you guys will go, or maybe the second time. I've done this, Rinkinson and I were chatting, I think this is my 7th time going, so I'll have to try it another time. I skipped, this is the first time I didn't go into the main exhibit, because, yeah.
The main exhibit is the down, right?
The main exhibit's the
underground?
one that you guys went through is the day of.
No, the other exhibit is underground.
Oh, the other exhibit's under the other fountain. So
Okay.
each of the former World Trade Center buildings have the fountains where their footprint was, and then beneath the fountains is those big boxes in the museum, and under those are the exhibitions. So it's
I only see one fountain, right?
the other's on the other side. The other's on the other side
okay, two
here.
fountains.
So we'll walk by it as we go to
Okay,
Brookfield.
Yeah.
All right. I think, and I know we're all out of order today, right? We saw 1920s, we saw 1870s. The reason we're here today is because due to COVID, this museum is not open the next few days. Otherwise, we would normally see this later in our sequence. This is very contemporary along with the Oculus. But for the flow of things and to give you guys access to see, you know, in addition to this being a journey through the history of lighting, this is also kind of a buffet of different lighting application types for us to see, right? We've seen large-scale transit. We're going to see more retail. We saw museum lighting as an example. We would have seen hotel lighting if I had bought a hotel key card. So we'll continue to see, and we saw House of Worship lighting. So we're getting a series of different forms that we're going to look at too. We'll be visiting an office. We'll be looking at an exterior park. So it's also an opportunity to kind of expose you to lots of different styles of lighting application. I think we should walk over to Brookfield Place, and then we'll come back via Calatrava's lovely Oculus. You ready to go see some retail stuff? So we're going to be going over to the World Financial Center in a moment, which is now Brookfield Place. First, I wanted to talk a little bit about One World Trade. What do we see happening with the glass here? Anyone know what kind of glass this is? This is diachroic glass. Remember it in our lab? So, you know, Fisher Moran Stone worked on the lighting design for this. Diachroic glass is not always a lighting designer's choice, but it's a good opportunity for us to, when talking, like Paul Morantz was doing with the architects, to try to shape with SOM some of the choices around this building. Introduction of diachroic glass as a passive way to change color, right? So as we change our angle, we're going to see different greens and purple hues coming out, and this functions day or night as a way to modulate color. So lighting designers aren't always restricted to just choosing lighting. Sometimes you can, as you build relationships with the architects or interior designers, you have that opportunity to influence, to talk about, you know, when you choose this for shades or blinds, if you do this for the finishes in the rooms, here's how it's going to impact the light. Now, looking the other direction at the at the what's now Brookfield Place, what was previously World Financial Center. Interesting, designed by Caesar Pelli in the 1980s, and Pelli got to redesign it as Brookfield Place, which is pretty cool for an architect to get to revisit your earlier work. This was done as a response to the international style. This is postmodernism, or postmodern style is the response that it uses. Essentially, the facade is clean windows and cladding, and the detail work that they put into it is at street level and on the top of the building. So we see more details, more accenting in the first few floors for our appreciation. And then in the slide deck we have after, you'll see each of the buildings in the World Financial Center is topped by, one has a pyramid, one has a ziggurat, one has a dome. There's different geometric shapes that kind of celebrate each building on the top. So again, 1980s architecture, a lot of which has transformed. World Financial Center was pretty devastated from 9/11. The Winter Garden, which is the domes we see and we're going to go into, the glass was all smashed from the impacts happening at World Trade, the sound and other things like that. But the Winter Garden has been restored and still has a lot of the 1980s glass work. A lot of what we see in 1980s architecture is, as mentioned at the Hilton, glass and steel and reflective materials, skylights, and a lot more light let into space. World Financial Center was the home to lots of the banking industry. Kind of Wall Street's over that direction. This was all the banks themselves. Now there's a series of offices here, residences. It's again a city in a city. And we're going to see a lot of the retail spaces and talk about contemporary retail lighting as we walk around. But let's cross over and check it out in more detail. And I should credit, the Winter Garden was not designed by Caesar Pelli. The World Financial Center was, but Diana Balmori was the architect who did the Winter Garden specifically. She worked with Caesar Pelli in a number of collaborations, but I should recognize her separately.
These are manually adjusted?
No, so you're talking about the
shut,
Got it. So what we're looking at in the base of One World Trade is the machine level. So there's airflow through those vents. Those don't open or close. There are not people back there. So on the way back, we'll go by 7 World Trade, which was the first of the buildings to go up. And the first 3 floors of that are generators, emergency equipment, building systems for the full site. This has a lot of the systems for this building are down at the base instead of up in the tower, for a variety of reasons. I think I have to go back and look. I think primarily it has to do with safety ideas. Like when they looked at why did the World Trade Center towers fail, a lot of the equipment was up at the top that contained volatile materials, things like that.
They're all at different angles.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're talking about I was looking at the inner things. These guys, I think they may adjust to allow ventilation through. Maybe it's automated. Yeah, I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure. Thanks. I was looking at the slots inside. Totally confused.
Maybe like things like
We'll have to Google.
wind energy.
Probably not wind energy, but I bet it is. It probably has to do with ventilation. That would make the most sense. The question is how automated is it, I think.
Why are they not all the same?
Yeah, yes.
We're gonna be inside.
Yeah, I know.
Come on, let's go.
Yeah, we'll make it across. Watch the bikes. No bikes coming. We're good. So before we head in, now that we're nice and close, so the first few floors of the buildings tend to have more massive entries, larger windows as part of the style, and then very simple geometry going up to the roof face. A lot of these are still original. We still have metal halide fixtures here that were installed late 80s. Eventually they'll probably be upgraded. But yeah, this idea of wall packs, geometric wall packs, we haven't seen a lot of them yet. You're going to see them all over Rockefeller Center. Why does someone choose to use a wall pack instead of a post light for ambiance in an area like this?
Cost.
It's a lot cheaper to install a wall pack because you don't have to put a pole in the ground for it. And it leaves the plaza more open. The disadvantages can become glare. We'll talk more about why people don't like wall packs, that it's sticking on the wall, it has to push a lot of light out this way, but they're often, you see them used a lot actually you see them used a lot everywhere. Wall packs are a fairly standard item. All right, let's go inside and warm up.
I got me too.
Yeah. So Caesar Pelli got to work. I mentioned Caesar Pelli got to revisit. This was one of the structures that Pelli's office got a chance to redesign. Collaboration with was it Kugler-Ning? Yeah, Kugler-Ning did the lighting for this section of the garden, working with Caesar Pelli, and won an illumination award for it. Later on, as we leave, we'll probably see a lot of these metal halide fixtures pushing light all the way up to the top. And these two spirals hold up the whole grid in front. So 1980s was all about smaller scale recessed lighting, the MR16 as something to celebrate, and compact fluorescent lamps. So we started to see a lot of circular you see the big glowy domes up there? That was something that became a trend in the 1980s. There's a lot of, those still exist in dorms across America, right? That ceiling mount shape, where the 80s was about stacking as many floors as you could in a building. It was about not having a lot of recessed depth above the ceiling for things. So small scale lights and surface mounts became used a lot in residential work. It appears here as well in different areas. So this is the winter garden, rebuilt after, reopened in 2011 after being rebuilt from 9/11, but still more or less preserved. It wasn't a big redesign, it was more a restoration of the original architecture. Some of the things you'll notice, big skylights, lots and lots of light coming in, enough to keep the trees alive. This is a challenge. And there's theatrical lighting. If you look up high to the sides, there's grids and locations to mount theatrical lighting. This is an event space. This is used for performances, concerts, weddings, and the stairs become an easy place for audience to sit and watch. Typically performance happen in the main space, but you can also spin it around. The acoustics here are, when we think about the 9/11 Memorial Museum and the the big volumes of those walls with the mesh steel. Think how quiet it was there versus here. Similar volumes to the rooms, but here there's nothing to absorb that sound. The glass bounces it, the marble bounces it. So this is one of the bigger challenges that honestly most malls have, right? You go to any mall or public transit spot where the materials are hard, there's nothing to absorb the sound, and it's very boxy. Everything echoes. Looking around, so some of the original downlights are still in some, you've got larger scale 4-inch and 6-inch downlights around here. I shouldn't say original. All of these have been replaced, but many of them may have been to the original specs because the point was to restore it to 1980s, not to update it. And again, that idea of glass and shine and opulence that the Hyatt Hotel had during the Trump era still exists here too, right? Bright, contrasty marble colors. A lot of this is still very true to the 1980s. With that said, the retail stores have transformed, are very different, right? Each, in this case, each facade for each retailer, once you get into the inner frames, each one is different. You can see what's consistent with the stone and where Ferragamo changes or Omega changes. Basically, that white box is the store's prerogative to change as they see fit. It's interesting to come back a year later and a lot of the retailers have the same displays out they had last year. This is surreal. We will walk up there in a bit, but I want to come over and look because we talked a lot last year about this retailer here and their window display. So what makes for good retail store display lighting? Highlight the product.
Bright but no glare.
Bright, no glare. All those are good. Or glare where you want it. Like maybe something is shiny and it grabs your attention, but generally low glare. Agreed. So how are they achieving it here? They've got these deep side pockets, right? We can see the lights from here, but as long as you're a few feet away, you're not in the glare from those light fixtures. Yeah, do you notice the integrated lighting, the tubes that run through the displays? So I should clarify, the bag is new this year. The display is the same as last year. They've reused the display. Yeah, so I should give them the credit. The designers have not been doing nothing. They've been at work. The stores just didn't change it. Flexibility is also really important for a store window. This is essentially like a little theatrical stage, right? So this time they've got a mannequin and product here. Next time maybe they'll have a totally different composition. So to give flexibility, these lights are mounted into a track so you can shift them up and down. Notice they also have lights up in tracks along the ceiling. When you think about light levels too, oftentimes the window display is the brightest part of the whole store because it's competing with daylight. In here, we're in a contained space, but we've got direct light from the sun right now, so we need a pretty good amount of light for this to pop. Lighting designers can get involved with retail lighting, although there's also specialized retail firms that fabricate stuff like this too. So when I talked about iCrave before, they tend to work more with retail and hospitality. This is very much what they would do. Let's come up with a design to get more light into these shapes. As we walk around and look at some of the approaches to how people brand the stores, it's interesting to see that this is where you're going to see a lot of newer technology. Very small scale LEDs, color changing we'll probably see, and certainly we'll see some screens integrated into the design too. Video projection as well. Let's keep moving. I'm trying to see if we can see the uplights in the trees. Normally there are some. No, they're not on. So you can see around each tree there's two There's 2 larger scale metal halide uplights as well, more ingrades. These have to be able to handle water, so the trees are watered directly through this grate. The lighting is able to it's completely enclosed, and there's actually a way for water to flow through the housing, which helps cool the lamp. That was a patent that Hydrel had, which is one of the better known ingrade manufacturers back in the day. This is really cute. All right, which store has the worst lighting in the windows right now?
Windows?
Yeah, which is the worst window lighting display? I agree with you. What do you think which window display has the worst lighting for you guys right now in this area? I agree with Mara.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're picking on the patisserie.
I don't mind the patisserie as much.
It's quiet. We were remarking on Louis Vuittons right now, which this is an example of poor focusing. It's a very busy background, and we've got shadows of chess boards, and the mannequins have hot spots on them. Very distracting, right? Yeah, I don't know. This is a good example of why some retail lighting firms will design and send out the shop drawings and have local people focus. Some others will go to the sites to do the focus themselves. Often this is about which brand employs you. Like there's a Shimstone Studios is a design, they're the designer for all the limited brands. So that's like the Limited and Victoria's Secret and 4 or 5 others. They go to each of the flagship stores to do the focus. So they do this focus, they do that focus. They wouldn't go to the small malls, but they'll fly around, you know, when they roll out a new design, they fly to all the major cities across the world over the course of 2 years to focus it themselves.
What happens after that?
After that, when there's a new version, then the local people in the stores do new displays, but they keep coming back to do focuses fairly often for the flagships. So they'll fly back out in the spring for the new line. They'll send one of their designers out to Malaysia to focus the lights in their biggest mall. And they'll each year, it's a recurring annuity. If you're a retail designer, you do a lot of the same focusing, hands-on experience on the same stores. You get to see a lot of places and fly a lot. It's exciting for that, but you're also redoing the same installation in a lot of spaces too, right? It's like, here's the design.
Maybe like that might be happen over here, right?
Yes, that could happen over here. They might have put in a new installation, and it might be waiting for someone to come focus it too. It's quite possible. That's true. Now that we've ragged on their window, I want to peek at the interior. I think their shelf lighting is better. I'll give them a little credit. They gave the designer a difficult time because there's a mirror there as well, which makes this feel continuous, but also means it's going to bounce more light. On the plus side, I really like the shelf lighting. Do you see how they both have focal glow on the purses and the glow behind them to help offset stuff? So I think there is some good retail lighting on the interior in terms of how it's approached, and the warm, consistent color temperature is good too. Yeah, I can't completely rag on them. That's not fair. Just the outside. They could use a refocus. They're like, what are they doing? All right, now we'll go upstairs and see some of the folks there.
I told Alex I'm going. He just said I was just. You have to leave.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, I'm tired. So large scale glowy clouds, very in from the 80s, using compact fluorescent most of the time, or PL lamps, which were the long double fluorescent lamps, folded in half, and they're still likely what's used here. Track lighting. So retail uses a lot of track light. We can see some in the Joe Malone store here. This is line voltage track, which we can tell because the head's sticking down and the drivers attached to them, versus the low voltage track that we tend to see more in residential applications. Keep moving this way, there's more stuff to look at. These are also likely original fixtures here. So the idea of the drop glass lens downlights, probably most known for, like, Louis Poulsen sold a ton of these in the 80s and 90s. Very trendy to have a downlight that had a little bit of a below the surface presence.
Huge.
Scale of these pendants,
Yeah.
like, I think they can grab the eye in when used properly. Two of them is a little bit much in a install, but not bad.
Yeah, they're-
I do like, oh, one other thing that is very much 1980s and 90s, recessed multiples I talked about before, but here's good examples. You've got two lights in one housing. The housing is squared off, but the lights can be rotated and pointed. In AGI, this is one of the few times when you use spin, as if you've got two lights that you're trying to point while keeping the light fixture aligned. But very useful in retail because it's a little cleaner looking than track light, but gives you 2 points to focus on multiple spots. So they remain a classic even in the world of LED these days. All right, we'll keep going. I wonder what the CRI is in there. I don't want to pick on that. It's cool, right? Color temperature is cool. They're I don't want to scare the customers. So an interesting architectural detail from Pelly's original work too. Notice how the coves are not straight across. There's a slope to them. So this still has fluorescent tubes on this. This is a fluorescent cove in terms of the scale, and they have. Actually, it looks like they might have put LED in from the end. Yeah, now I think it is LED because you can see every couple feet there's a little bit of difference. But the pocket, the shape is still built for fluorescent, so it had a big scoop to help push that light down. So even though it was a fluorescent, which is pretty diffuse, and even now the LED is filling that void, it's pushing the light pretty far down the wall. It's functioning as a grazer. And they've got the HVAC integrated in a line, so this really predates the idea of the tech zone ceiling, but it's that it carries that idea through with let's put everything in the middle.
In one line, yeah. Right.
Yeah, yeah. This is not an actual tech zone, but they were coordinating it as if it was.
Sprinkler and everything.
Yeah. No, I thought the lighting in that salon was horrible.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to make the gentleman in there or the other people feel bad. Huh. I think up ahead is the video wall stuff. We'll see. Oh yeah. Linear wall wash. Okay, a few things to think and take note of here. So here we have we've got a continuous MR16 wall wash. You can actually see where there's one out midway down. So this is a very 1980s fixture as well, 80s or 90s, where continuous all the way along to light this vertical. So each MR16 is behind a the linear spread lens, and that's helping stretch the light down. Interestingly, when we look over at the pattern here, actually if we walk towards Hudson East, we'll see there's two lights near the wall. They changed the spacing. That's because they need to integrate two throw distances for the wall washers. There's a near and a far throw. Thanks. So if we look at the pattern here, they have more consistent spacing leading up, and then they've got double lines here. That is a close and a far wall wash to try to extend over the double height space. That was their best solution with the outputs they had then. Now we could get a high output wall washer that would do this, but then we'd max out at 75 watts with an MR16. So this was the best solution. So the double line is doing the double height wall washing in the space. Then we've got single downlights kind of marching along every 8 feet for the rest of the space.
It looks like it's downlight.
So these are probably downlight wall washers. Let's see. Are they just downlights? The application would be for a wall washer, but they look like downlights. So maybe they were spacing these. Yeah, Rinkinson's right. These are downlights with the current optic. I'd have to get down there and look. Maybe originally they were a downlight wall washer, so a downlight that had a higher white reflector on one side to kick light against the wall. But right now they look like they're just downlights. So they're effectively grazing the wall, I guess, but not, yeah, that's very strange. I'll have to go back and look. Maybe they updated them to LED retrofits and don't have a wall wash version, because they used to be wall washers a few years ago. Huh. I think around the corner we have some video signage too, and then we'll break for dinner. I think people are hungry. Yeah, these are retrofit kits. All right. So a little more about specifying digital signage and video walls. So we think about what's the, yeah, have a seat. We think about when you're looking at a video wall, what's the distance we're going to see it from? What kind of content are we sharing? Actually, a story. The Bloomberg Tower looked at what Bloomberg Tower's up. We'll be able to see it from Rockefeller tonight. It's up on 53rd or 54th. They saw the 2007 relight of the Empire State Building, and then Durst was like, "Wait a minute! I want Bloomberg Tower lit to be even bigger deal. I want video screens on all four sides." Prior to that, the Bloomberg Tower has 3 stories worth of glowy lens. It turns from warm to cool over the course of the day to night. So it's a very gradual transition, 3-pixel idea, like Neapolitan ice cream or something. But he wanted to replace all of that with video screens. And the city said, no, can't do it because it's going to constitute advertising, giant billboard advertising. They had to negotiate down what's the pixel spacing that would qualify it to not be signage and still be considered architectural lighting. A difficult feat, because essentially it shouldn't, at least in my opinion, it shouldn't be about the pixel spacing, it should be about the actual content, right? You could take a video monitor that's running advertisements and instead put the northern lights on it, and you would want it to be high resolution and call it virtual wallpaper that's part of the lighting design idea. But right now we have to think of the way the city currently looks at things. It's about the depth of the spacing between pixels, the pixel pitch, that helps dictate whether something constitutes a sign or constitutes a light fixture or art installation. So whether it's advertisement sign versus something else. Other pieces of language, there are screens that, like there are modular screens like we see here where there are bezels between them. There's stuff that's seamless and they can snap together. There is also pixel mapping where, as a lighting designer, you might choose products that have like a rope of Christmas lights, string of lights, but each one can be individually turned on and or off or changed color individually. That is a way for you as a lighting designer to design your own screen that can then be pixel mapped. So we have some control over things. There are some stadiums, soccer stadiums, that have won awards in the past. I'll have to pull up some of the cities where they exist. But a lot of them, even at the last Summer Olympics, so not the most recent ones, but the ones last year, the stadium had LED pixel mapping across a lot of the facades so that you could make chases. You couldn't do something as literal as writing words out in it or a high resolution image, but it was enough to create rhythm and color and tell its own story. So there's always a fine line between adding a screen to your project versus specifying lighting that you're going to use to show content. But you get a lot more wiggle room in retail and advertising, retail lighting design with it. It's much harder to do when you get into facade lighting, stuff that's going to be exterior, where there's a lot more restrictions on signage compared to retail. So it's just interesting to think of. I've seen a couple designers start to integrate light, especially inside of retail shops, video screens as the light source. So going into a dressing room where the only light source you see is coming from a video screen and you can control that. Those are things that exist now. Although they still have to have an emergency light. So most of them have a little light in the ceiling that has a battery on it. So if the power goes out, you can get out. Is anyone for your projects for 750 looking at video screens or getting into that world? Color changing? Oh, that's good. It ranges. Sometimes people who pick the retail store start to dive deep into this world too. So if any... Yeah, studio classes.
Video screens above in my lab.
Oh, great. In pharmaceutical lab or the...
It's the diagnostics lab.
Yes, the diagnostics lab. Cool.
Testing area. I originally have one that's above for the employees that delve into a different environment.
That's cool. Nice. Like the lights on top of the beams are pretty interesting. Yeah. I'm going to start recording. I stopped before. Cool. So yeah, looking up at the ceiling, you know, the spurs give good cut, or the ribs give good cut off to the light fixtures above. One of the things that last year's class commented on, noticing a lot of dust gathering in certain areas and dirt. Like, how do we maintain and clean this structure? Looks like it's a lot cleaner this year. We'll see as we walk if you notice that. But it was maybe that was not about the, you know, as we think about lighting, how do we maintain it? What do we need to do to make it work? What about
I hate advertisements. I think they should be illegal. Like when you go into old European cities, it's like an eighth of the advertisements that you see in the States.
That's
'Cause
true.
There's more respect for space and I don't know, maybe because it's historical space.
Yeah.
I understand
Like
that. I
you go
understand.
around Paris and it's like mostly just at a bus stop or something. It's not like everywhere you look. It's not like a moving video while you're trying to drive on a freeway or a bridge.
This is the danger of modular screens. We got 3 pixels out.
That's like all my old carpenter friends just became video wall guys because they don't want to break their body and you sit on a show all day
Yeah.
long replacing panels.
That's true. Edge-lit designs.
I like the kind of dynamicness of that, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting the different colors we have going on here by the, I think the New Jersey Transit Hub. Yeah.
But I wonder that's intentional or kind of.
I imagine it's not intentional. I know.
Color is gone.
I think it's different generation of like.
I think it's a different brand for the uplights, and when LED fails, generally the phosphor's wearing away, so it gets more and more violet till it goes blue. This happened for the there's a museum down, I think it's called the Federal Building, down in Lower Manhattan. All the LEDs went blue over the course of 3 years, and it almost
The phosphor deteriorates.
the phosphor deteriorates because of
and it
heat
ends up
buildup.
being the original kind of blue LED.
Yeah, so that's my prediction. Is what we're looking at there is either poorly specified white LED where it was off, the CCT was way, it was correlated to 3000K but maybe very purple. But my guess is it's just these are dying
Really
more
loud.
quickly because it's just that rib that looks this way.
Yeah.
Might be heat buildup too. Maybe that's the apex of the, yeah. Be interesting because I don't think it's a choice. Everything else here is the same colors,
Yeah.
right?
But this looks like it's daylight coming, right? The uplight over here.
Reflected from the ones tucked in.
Yeah, I think it's reflections. I mean, what we're looking at across the way is probably a duplication of this. So I think you see those vertical
Yeah.
bands. I think that's what we're seeing here. All right. We'll go into the main area and before and after photos of how excited and energetic we were, and then with one more to go, how tired and hungry we are. It's just good though.
9.5 hours later.
Yeah, no, that's true. This is a brutal day.
It's so cold.
Huh. I wonder if that's a cleaning machine there? I don't know what that red thing is. All right. So, I can't believe we've gone almost a whole day since we saw the Apple Store in Grand Central Station. But since this is our second Apple Store, we'll pause a minute to think about the differences between what we saw there and what we see here. So this has been Apple's standard design for about 4 years, I think. This idea of the stretched illuminated panels to provide soft lighting, circled by these track lights at the edge for pop, and then vertical lighting in the side displays. This is their standard store approach, and it's usually about 100 foot candles. So very different from our Grand Central experience, but the working planes are still similar, right? They're still tables with light. They just achieved it by having those table lamps in Grand Central, versus this one fills the whole room with light, right?
They are trying to fit in the design.
I think,
Lighting design?
yeah.
Got that, yeah.
So they're trying to what? Fit in the lighting?
Fit in the lighting design for the Apple store. Patent.
Stayed in? I don't know. What,
Patent. P-A-T-E-N-T. Patent.
patents? Oh yeah, the patents for
Yeah.
it? Yes, it's a patented design by Apple. They own that. I think they own that design from that lighting designer. I have to double check. But they're trying to say that they own. Yeah, where's the intellectual property line between some of these stretch ceilings, right? If you design a stretch ceiling, usually the manufacturer that figures out the actual stretch ceiling stuff, and they own the patent for the application. There are other companies like, I mentioned iCrave a few times, but since we're in the retail world, iCrave tends to design a product for a retailer and they say they own the IP, they own the intellectual property rights. So if another dining establishment wants to use this pendant, that's your pendant and you get money from it. Very different than Fisher Morant Stone that worked on the, so by the way, here we are in the Oculus, Calatrava as the architect, and Fisher Morant Stone was the lighting designer. Same folks that did One World Trade, that did the outside of the museum. Fisher Morant Stone won awards for this. Use of daylight, integrating the moving lights to help fill things. It's a very monolithic space.
How the moving lights are like adjusted, like
So
what they are doing, like.
The moving lights do nothing right now. When there's events that happen or Christmas, things like that, these are on pivots, so they're multi-channel lights. One channel may be intensity, one might be RGB color, but then tilt and pan and fine tilt and pan. All of these are added in so that they can do everything from iris up and down.
Oh, okay.
So these are somewhat outdated theatrical moving lights. Yeah, they're an older style than what exists now. These are still probably the metal halide interior light source. Useful for productions, so when they have a dance recital here or Christmas Santa's workshop, they can light it up. And then there's speakers clusters throughout as well for performance. So yeah, that's part of the integration. And then there's uplights that help fill this in the evening. So as it gets darker, right now we get the interesting mix between daylight and the 4000K that's the standard color in here. Yeah, feels very different than Fulton Center a few blocks away, right? Those very dark colors. You got your meter, Rinkinson? Let's see how much light's in here.
Yeah.
Anyone want to guess?
Yeah, guess.
Okay. 10-foot candles, 20, 80. What was that?
17.
17.
I'm gonna go 28, 30. Go high.
I think
why not?
5. I don't know.
5.
I have no idea.
20.
20. 17 was darn close. We'll take it.
Yeah, 20, 25. Yes. Nice.
So low lighting, but because of how white everything is here, you don't need much lighting at all, right? Very highly reflective. I think very interesting about some of what is unique to my mind about this as a mall space is that the structure and the ribs largely conceal the shopping, right? When you come in the main entrance, the ribs are blocking any view of the stores. It's only as you walk through that you see them. So it minimizes the idea of it being a mall. There's a lot of negative space. For me, it helps with wayfinding. I have less distraction until I'm walking by the stores. I'm able to say, oh, there's path trains. It's highlighted right there. So very clean application. And this is probably one of the most contemporary spaces that we will see. Well, we do go to Hudson Yards our last day, and we'll see a few other form factors there. But use of daylighting, getting away from rectilinear shapes. All of this is some of where the most contemporary architecture takes us. And almost all of it integrates lighting design from an early stage. Well, when you think about coordination on the lighting going into the grid system where there's so little structure to integrate lights into, but as we go back out and exit, you'll see more of it.
So you think like it's beneficial to get these permanent theatrical fixtures, or to like rent
In
out,
actuality,
like,
probably not, because
$1 million of lighting up there.
it's a lot of money for something that gets dated fairly quickly. Each of those has integral fans that keep the light cool. They're not quiet. Well, they're quiet, but not as quiet as what you can get now. And they're so much bigger. Easier probably to have the places to hook up the theatrical
they have
equipment,
that, yeah, places. Yeah.
and then just add them when you actually need to use them.
Yeah.
But hey, maybe they thought about the labor to add it there, and it was more efficient to just put it in permanently.
It's more that they're older fixtures. Like if they were newer, small form factor, when the prices went down, and they bought them to own them, it would probably make more sense now than like early adoption.
Yeah. The position makes a lot of sense. That putting them at this height, they can shoot across the space, they can angle both ways with minimal cutoff, but they're relatively hidden unless you're looking for them. It's not bad. Yeah, and there are color changing RGBs that go up the ribs too, that are just in grade. They're mounted into the structure, but they can change the colors, kind of aiming up too. All right, I think it's time to break and get some food. We've made it here. Yeah.